Mr. President, I have great respect for the current President of the United States. He has gone through a very difficult and dangerous path to return to power in the White House. We all know this very well, including the fact that he has experienced an attempt, and not just one attempt, on his life. He is a courageous man, and this is clear. What he is doing within the country, in the Middle East, and his efforts to resolve the Ukrainian crisis are, of course, highly appreciated. I have already said this, and I want to say it publicly. I believe that President Trump is sincerely striving for the principle of resolving the issue on the Ukrainian track. The so-called Western community, the collective West, if it can even be called collective today, nevertheless is putting everything upside down. Why? Because the increase in military spending and the military excitement that we have just mentioned are all based on one thesis, on Russia's aggressiveness. And this is exactly the opposite. After all, now the turning point of all these discussions is the beginning of a special military operation in 2022. But as we all approach this special military operation, no one said a word about it. What did it all start with? Against the background of this rhetoric about the alleged aggressiveness of Russia, they start talking about the need to arm themselves. Well, let them arm themselves. Let's look at the structure of these expenses, at the structure of these arms. Tell me, how is the process of Ukrainian regulation progressing now? In particular, when the third round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine takes place, two have already taken place in Istanbul, and it is also known that the parties have exchanged their memorandum projects on regulation. What do you think of the Ukrainian project, the Kiev project? How do you assess it? And was there any reaction from Kiev to the Russian memorandum project? As for the memorandums, as expected, nothing unexpected happened. I will not tell you anything unexpected. These are two completely opposite memorandums, but negotiations are being held in order to find a way to get closer. As for the fact that they were completely opposite, it seems to me that there is nothing surprising here either. I would not like to go into detail because I do not consider it purposeful or even harmful to predict the negotiations themselves. As for what was done as a result of the negotiations, I think you can see for yourself. Today, in my opinion, another exchange took place, and yesterday. Today, in my opinion, and it is still important, this humanitarian component is important because it creates conditions, as diplomats say, for substantive discussion of the essence of the problem. We agreed that we would continue further contacts after the end of the exchanges and after the humanitarian action that took place. We were offered to hand over the bodies of our fallen servicemen. We have already handed over more than 6,000 bodies, and we are ready to hand over almost 3,000 more. But it is up to the Ukrainian side to accept the bodies of its fallen soldiers. We agreed that after the completion of this stage, we would hold a third round of negotiations. In general, we are ready for this. We need to agree on a place and a time. I hope that the President of the Turkish Republic, Mr. Erdogan, will remain in his position in support of this process. We are very grateful to him for this. We are ready to hold such a meeting in Istanbul. Specifically, when the heads of the negotiating groups from both sides are in constant contact with each other, they are constantly in touch. In my opinion, this is already good. They are now negotiating a time for the next meeting. What will be the subject of the meeting? The subject, in my opinion, should be a discussion of memorandums from both sides. Yes, please. First of all, the so-called Western community, the collective West, if it can even be called collective today, nevertheless is putting everything upside down. Why? Because the increase in military spending and the military excitement that we have just mentioned are all based on one thesis, on Russia's aggressiveness. And this is exactly the opposite. After all, now the turning point of all these discussions is the beginning of a special military operation in 2022. But as we all approach this special military operation, no one said a word about it. What did it all start with? With the fact that we were beaten, we were coarsely deceived, as they say in our people, about the non-expansion of NATO to the east. After all, it is well known to the whole world that Russia was promised that NATO would not advance a single inch to the east. and then one wave of expansion after another. After all, we have always said that the security of one country or a group of countries cannot be ensured by the security of another. And this is how it is written in international documents which were not agreed upon by everyone. What was happening in practice? One expansion after another. And we were told all the time, but you should not be afraid of this. It does not threaten you. And when we said we believe that it threatens us, what did they answer? Nothing at all. They just sent us away with our opinion. And absolutely no one considered it and did not want to consider it. But we know better what threatens us and what does not. It is our right to determine the degree of our security and the level of threats that may approach us from one or the other side. But no one listened to us, and we all moved in this direction. Is this not aggressive behavior? This is aggressive behavior that the West does not want to pay attention to. It was the same in our country when the collective West supported separatism in our country and such an instrument of fighting Russia as terrorism. No one wanted to pay attention to some kind of ISIS if it functions in Russia, and the explosion in Moscow and everything else that has been going on until recently, and no one wants to pay attention to it. Everything is fine if it is against Russia. Well, haven't we seen it? And there everyone sees and understands it perfectly. But they talk about something else. They talk about our aggression. Look at yourselves. We have a good saying, they notice the old woman in someone else's eyes, but do not want to see the log in their own. And what is happening? Against the background of this rhetoric about the alleged aggressiveness of Russia, they start talking about the need to arm themselves. Well, let them arm themselves. Let's look at the structure of these expenses, at the structure of these arms. In the first part, I said, we believe that the reference to the aggressiveness of Russia be in it. We are not aggressive, but the West is so-called collective and aggressive. The same thing happened in Ukraine, by the way. And what? How can we name what happened as a result of the coup supported by the collective West? First, they came, signed guarantees between the president, the presidential authority, and the opposition. Then, a few days later, they held a coup, supported it, paid money for it, publicly confessed to it, and then began to say that Russia is acting aggressively. What is this? They are idiots themselves, or they are taking us for fools. Then we know what happened in Donbass. 8 years of bloody war against the civilian population, in fact. And we have been trying for 8 years to reach an agreement to solve this issue peacefully. We were deceived, publicly confessed again about it. Both the former chancellor and the former president of France publicly said that they were not going to comply with the Minsk agreements, but only signed them in order to pump weapons into the Ukrainian regime. They have been leading this war for 8 years, and we, in order to put an end to this war, were forced to accept the armed forces, recognizing the independence of both republics in strict compliance with the UN Charter. No one pays attention to this. Since this moment, everyone has been asking why this happened, how it happened, what their fault is, as if they were babies who were born just yesterday. This is not going to work. This game is over. They want to increase their military spending. Let them increase it, but this also speaks of their aggressiveness. Let me explain why. Yes, our spending is not small. It is 6.3% of GDP. Is this a lot or not? I think it is a lot. This is, of course, one of the problems, including the budget that we have to solve, and we are solving it with dignity. By the way, I do not want to make political analogies because the reasons for the conflict are completely different. But from a financial and economic point of view, during the war in Korea that the United States waged, they spent 14% of their budget on this, while during the war in Vietnam they spent 10%. However, these problems were solved mainly due to the increase in the tax burden on large-earning people. In the first case, they did not pay attention to the macroeconomy. In the second case, they treated it more healthily. But we are fighting for a healthy macroeconomy. Now let's talk about the spending. 6.3%. Is this a lot or not? 6.3% of Russia's GDP for defense needs is 13.5 trillion rubles, and our GDP is 223 trillion rubles. Is this a lot or not? Not a lot. We paid for this inflation, but we are now fighting against this inflation. Yes, we are aiming for a soft landing of the economy and something. Nevertheless, we are fighting against this inflation. We are treating it very healthily. By the way, I have already mentioned that the level of wages is increasing in all Eurasian countries and in Russia. Last year, it increased by 9.7%, and in the first 4 or 5 months of the current year, it increased by 4% in real terms. This is, by the way, a satisfactory indicator at least. What is happening in Western countries? They are burying us all the time. They will soon die there, but they are constantly burying us. Last year, we had 4.3% of economic growth. Last year, it was 4.1%. It will be much more modest in order to fight inflation, but we are doing it purposefully. In the Eurozone, the growth rate is 0.9%. In the leading economies and industrial centers of development in Europe, both in France and in France, everything is balancing on the verge of recession. As for the armed forces, everyone is saying that we have some problems and that we will soon be defeated strategically in Russia. This rhetoric is still going on. At the same time, they are saying that we are going to attack NATO countries. Where is the logic? If everything is falling apart, why are we going to attack NATO? They are talking nonsense. They don't believe it, but their population is trying to convince it in order to squeeze more money out of people and for them to agree to bear the heavy burden of these expenses in the social sphere. By the way, we are spending these trillions, to a significant extent, to support our defense industrial complex, to support ourselves and our loved ones. What will they spend these trillions on? They will spend them on purchases in the United States and on supporting their defense industrial complex. This is not our concern. It is their concern. Let them do what they want. Now, the most important thing, we are planning to reduce our defense spending. Next year, and in a year's time, for the next 3 years, we are planning to reduce our defense spending. We have not reached a final agreement between the Defense Ministry and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economic Development. But in general, everyone is thinking in this direction. Europe is thinking about how to increase its defense spending. Who is preparing for any aggressive actions? We or they? Yes, we want to complete a special military operation with the desired result. Of course. But this is what we're counting on. We're counting on this, not on aggressive plans for Europe and NATO countries. We are planning to reduce our defense spending, and they are planning to increase it. Who is acting aggressively? This is the basis of their policy in the field of defense and security. Therefore, all their arguments about the fact that they are going to increase their defense spending, let them do so. But this will not improve the situation for them in the field of security, but in the field of the economy and the social sphere, it will inevitably worsen. Recently, the President of France stated the need to introduce another package of sanctions against Russia. Judging by the statements of European officials, this package of sanctions could include measures such as a reduction of the price of Russian oil by up to $45 and secondary sanctions for its buyers. What do you think about the President's rhetoric and the consequences of such decisions? I have already partially answered this question. The more sanctions there are, the worse it is for those who introduce them. This applies to France and to the European economy as a whole. If you look at the statistics, the volume of gas purchased has increased due to the ECB. Europe began to buy more. Today, the price of oil by over 400 euros per 1,000 cubic meters. Now the price of oil from 75 to 65, and now it is at 66. What will happen if something else happens in the Middle East? What will happen? They will cover our oil, at least somehow, although they will not be able to do this. It is simply impossible today. The volume of oil and oil products in the world is growing due to the growth of the economy. There is no escape from this. The volume is growing, and the production is increasing only in the volume that we agreed on as part of the OPEC Plus agreement. And it is designed to increase demand, especially in the summer. I do not see anything that would benefit the European economy. Will it be harmful to us? We will see, based on the realities that will emerge, but I do not think that this will significantly affect us. I mean that hundreds of thousands of sanctions have already been imposed, and we are where we are. As I said, last year the economy grew by 4.3%, and in the Eurozone it grew by 0.9 or 0.8%. Please, Andrei. Good afternoon. Andrei Kolesnikov, Kommersant newspaper. Mr. President, don't you feel that it is time for you to meet Donald Trump in person? It seems to me that you are moving away from each other. Well, there is a telephone, but it is eye to eye. What do you think? Mr. President, I have great respect for the current President of the United States. He has gone through a very difficult and dangerous path to return to power in the White House. We all know this very well, including the fact that he has experienced an attempt, and not just one attempt, on his life. He is a courageous man, and this is clear. What he is doing within the country, in the Middle East, and his efforts to resolve the Ukrainian crisis are, of course, highly appreciated. I have already said this, and I want to say it publicly. I believe that President Trump is sincerely striving for the principle of resolving the issue on the Ukrainian track. He recently said that it was more difficult than it seemed from the outside. Well, it is so. And there is nothing special here either. One thing is when you look from the outside, and another thing is when you plunge into the problem. The same thing is happening in the Middle East. Although perhaps he had more experience and was more involved in the events in the Middle East, it is still difficult there. Real life is always more difficult than it seems. I am always open to contacts and meetings. I know that President Trump also mentioned the possibility of such meetings. I also believe that such meetings need to be prepared. As a result, we should reach some new levels of cooperation. In general, thanks to President Trump, relations between Russia and the United States are beginning to even out. Not everything has been resolved in the sphere of diplomatic relations, but the first steps have been taken and we are moving forward. We have established a working contact between the main agencies, the State Department, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Special Services, which is also very important because, for example, the fight against terrorism is important for us in any situation.